Welcome to our deep dive into insolvency-driven acquisitions under India's Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, or IBC. In this video, we'll explore how the IBC, originally designed as a credit discipline statute, has become a transformative channel for mergers and acquisitions, especially when companies face financial distress. We'll cover the entire process, from initiation to the clean slate effect, and practical considerations for acquirers. Whether you're a student, practitioner, or just curious about how distressed assets are acquired in India, this guide will walk you through the essential concepts and real-world implications. Let's start by understanding the IBC's framework and its significance in the M&A landscape. IBC wasn't initially intended as an M&A tool, but its Corporate Insolvency Resolution Process, or CIRP, has made it a key route for acquiring distressed companies. The process puts the entire business up for acquisition by a resolution applicant, offering a court-proved, clean slate entry at a restructured price. This means buyers can step in without the baggage of old liabilities, making the IBC route especially attractive for those seeking value in distressed assets. Understanding this process is crucial for anyone involved in M&A in India, as it fundamentally changes how deals are structured and executed. This part of the treatise covers four main chapters: the IBC framework, the resolution plan process in Section 29A, eligibility, the clean slate effect in Section 31, and practical considerations like pricing and risk. Each chapter builds on the previous ones, providing a comprehensive understanding of how insolvency-driven acquisitions work under the IBC. We'll move step by step, starting with the basics of initiation and the roles of key institutions, before diving into eligibility, plan approval, and the practical realities of acquiring through CIRP. For M&A students and practitioners, the IBC is a game changer. It overrides CIRP pre-existing creditor rights, creates new institutional infrastructure like the NCLT and NCLAT, and fundamentally alters company governance once CIRP starts. The process is a time-bound, competitive auction of the entire business, supervised by the NCLT. This makes understanding the IBC essential for anyone looking to acquire distressed assets, as it sets the rules for how deals are initiated, evaluated, and closed. Corporate Insolvency Resolution Process, or CIRP, can be initiated by three parties: financial creditors, operational creditors, or the corporate debtor itself. Financial creditors can apply if a default of at least 1 crore occurs, while operational creditors must first issue a demand notice and allow 10 days for dispute resolution. The corporate debtor can also apply voluntarily, though this is less common. Once an application is received, the NCLT must admit or reject it within 14 days, though delays are common in practice. Upon admission, the process officially begins and an interim resolution professional is appointed. Key feature of the IBC is the automatic moratorium that kicks in when CIRP starts. This moratorium prohibits the institution or continuation of suits against the corporate debtor, prevents the transfer or disposal of assets, and stops creditors from enforcing security interests. Essential goods and services must continue to be supplied. This protective umbrella preserves the value of the debtor's estate and prevents a race among creditors to enforce claims individually. For acquirers, the moratorium is crucial for due diligence, as it freezes the legal landscape and ensures that all claims are addressed in the resolution plan. After the interim resolution professional is appointed, a Committee of Creditors (COSI) is formed, consisting of all financial creditors. The COSI holds significant power. It approves or rejects resolution plans, can extend the CIRP timeline, and even decide on liquidation. Approval of a plan requires a 66% voting share, a threshold designed to balance creditor interests and prevent minority blocks. Operational creditors don't have voting rights but must receive at least the liquidation value under any approved plan. The COSI's decisions shape the outcome of the CIRP. Statutorily, the CIRP is supposed to be completed within 180 days, extendable by 90 days with COSI approval, for a maximum of 270 days. In exceptional cases, the timeline can stretch to 330 days, including litigation periods. However, in reality, the average resolution takes over 700 days, and extensions are common due to practical challenges. Recent legislative reforms aim to streamline the process, but the gap between statutory timelines and actual practice remains a key issue for acquirers and creditors alike. Once CIRP begins, the resolution professional issues an expression of interest, inviting potential acquirers to submit resolution plans. Access to the confidential information memorandum, which details the company's business, assets, and liabilities, is only granted to applicants who meet Section 29A eligibility criteria. This process is essentially a controlled auction, where applicants conduct due diligence and submit binding plans within a set deadline. The competitive nature of this stage is designed to maximize value for creditors. Section 29A is a gatekeeper provision that determines who can submit a resolution plan. Its main goal is to prevent promoters and related parties responsible for a company's distress from regaining control at a discount. The section lists several categories of ineligible persons, including willful defaulters, those with non-performing assets, convicted individuals, and those disqualified under the Companies Act. The scope of ineligibility extends to connected persons, making it one of the most debated aspects of the IBC. Let's break down who is ineligible under Section 29A. Willful defaulters, those with overdue non-performing assets, convicted persons, and those barred by a CBI or disqualified as directors are all excluded. The provision also covers anyone involved in fraudulent transactions or who has failed to pay invoke guarantees. Importantly, the disqualification extends to connected persons, including holding and subsidiary companies, making the net very wide. This ensures that those responsible for distress can't simply use proxies to regain control. Supreme Court's decision in ArcelorMittal India Pvt. Limited. V. Satish Kumar Gupta clarified key aspects of Section 29A. The court held that eligibility is assessed at the time of plan submission, and that the connected persons concept applies even to those acting in concert for the resolution plan. The judgment also clarified how non-performing asset disqualifications can be cured, emphasizing actual payment over mere tendering. This case set important precedents for how eligibility is determined in practice. Section 29A's exclusion of promoters from the resolution process is one of the most debated aspects of the IBC. Critics argue that in some industries, promoters have unique expertise or relationships that could maximize value. Excluding them may reduce the pool of bidders and lower recoveries for creditors. Proponents, however, believe that this exclusion is necessary to maintain discipline and prevent abuse. The debate continues, with some sector-specific carve-outs and ongoing policy discussions. Section 30 of the IBC lays out what a valid resolution plan must include. It must prioritize payment of CIRP costs, ensure operational creditors receive at least liquidation value, and provide for descending financial creditors. The plan must also outline post-approval management and comply with all applicable laws. These requirements ensure fairness and legal compliance, balancing the interests of different creditor classes and the corporate debtor. Once the Committee of Creditors approves a resolution plan by 66% vote, it's submitted to the NCLT for sanction under Section 31. The NCLT checks if the plan meets all requirements and, if satisfied, approves it. This approval makes the plan binding on all stakeholders, including government authorities and creditors. The result is the much-discussed clean slate effect, where the acquirer takes over the company free from old liabilities not included in the plan. Clean Slate Doctrine is a cornerstone of IBC-driven acquisitions. Once a resolution plan is approved, all claims not included in the plan are extinguished, regardless of whether they were raised or voted upon during the CIRP. This gives the acquirer a fresh start, free from legacy liabilities. The Supreme Court has affirmed this principle in several landmark cases, making it a key attraction for buyers considering distressed assets under the IBC. Supreme Court's decision in Committee of Creditors of SR Steel India Limited. V. Satish Kumar Gupta is a landmark in IBC jurisprudence. The court clarified that the NCLT's role is limited to ensuring compliance with Section 30(2) and cannot interfere with the commercial wisdom of the COSI. The judgment also reinforced the binding nature of approved resolution plans, even on creditors who didn't participate in the CIRP. This case cemented the clean slate effect as a central feature of the IBC process. Ganeshyam Misra and Sons Pvt. Limited, v. Edelweiss Asset Reconstruction Co. Limited. The Supreme Court further clarified the clean slate effect. The court held that once a resolution plan is approved, all past, present, and future claims, including government dues not mentioned in the plan, are extinguished. This has significant implications for acquirers, especially when dealing with companies with large statutory liabilities. However, practitioners must check for any legislative carve-outs or recent judicial decisions that may affect specific liabilities. Application of the clean slate effect to government dues like taxes and provident fund contributions has been a hotly contested issue. Government departments often argue that statutory dues should survive resolution plan approval. However, the Supreme Court has generally upheld the IBC's primacy, extinguishing such claims unless specifically provided for in the plan. This area remains dynamic with ongoing litigation and legislative responses, so it's important to stay updated on the latest developments. Section 31(4) requires that any approvals needed under other laws, such as from the Competition Commission of India (CCI), must be obtained before implementing the resolution plan. The Supreme Court has clarified that, for notifiable combinations, CCI approval is needed before the COSI approves the plan, not just before implementation. This sequencing affects CIRP planning and timelines, as regulatory review periods must be factored into the process. IBC-driven acquisitions differ significantly from traditional negotiated M&A deals. Instead of bilateral negotiations, the CIRP is a competitive, time-bound process where the highest qualifying plan is selected. The clean slate effect replaces traditional representations and warranties, and existing shareholders often lose control. Diligence is more limited and time-pressured, and regulatory approvals like CCI must be obtained earlier in the process. Understanding these differences is key for anyone considering an IBC acquisition. Pricing in IBC-driven acquisitions is not constrained by minimum acquisition prices. The only requirements are that CIRP costs are paid first, and operational and descending financial creditors receive at least liquidation value. The rest is negotiated between the COSI and applicants. In practice, competition among bidders drives up the resolution amount, but it usually involves a significant haircut compared to total outstanding claim. The focus is on maximizing recovery for creditors within the constraints of the distressed situation. Section 53 Liquidation Waterfall set the priority for distributing proceeds if a company is liquidated. CIRP and liquidation costs come first, followed by workmen's dues, secured creditors, employees, unsecured creditors, government dues, and finally shareholders. This order is crucial for resolution applicants, as it defines the minimum payments required in a resolution plan and serves as the baseline for COSI negotiation. The Supreme Court has upheld this structure as constitutionally valid. Due diligence in a CIRP context is very different from standard M&A. The process is compressed, often allowing only weeks instead of months. The information memorandum may be incomplete, and representations from the resolution professional are not as robust as traditional seller warranties. acquirers must focus on critical issues like title to key assets, material contracts, and regulatory licenses. The clean slate effect reduces but does not eliminate post-acquisition risks, especially for liabilities that arise after NCLT approval. Even with the clean slate effect, some risks remain for acquirers. Liabilities that arise after NCLT approval, such as new statutory obligations or environmental requirements, fall on the new owner. Certain pre-CIRP liabilities like fraud-related claims or offenses not covered by Section 32A may also survive. It's essential for resolution applicants to carefully assess these risks during due diligence and plan for potential contingencies. Section 32A provides critical protection for resolution applicants. Once a resolution plan is approved, the corporate debtor and its assets cannot be prosecuted for offenses committed before CIRP, as long as the applicant was not involved in the offense. This also means that assets cannot be attached in criminal proceedings after approval. This provision was introduced to boost confidence among buyers, ensuring that enforcement actions don't undermine the clean slate effect. IBC framework is continually evolving. Recent amendments have aimed to streamline timelines, clarify eligibility, and address gaps in the process. For example, the 2025 Amendment Bill proposes requiring the NCLT to record reasons for delays and introduces other procedural reforms. Staying updated on legislative changes is essential for practitioners and acquirers, as the legal landscape can shift quickly. Despite clear statutory timelines, the practical reality of CIRP often involves delays, extensions, and litigation. Acquirers must be prepared for a process that can take much longer than anticipated. The competitive nature of plan submissions, regulatory approval requirements, and the need for rapid diligence all add complexity. Success in IBC-driven acquisitions requires flexibility, persistence, and a clear understanding of the process. National Company Law Tribunal (NCLT) acts as the adjudicating authority for CIRP, while the National Company Law Appellate Tribunal (NCLAT) handles appeals. Their roles are central to the process, from admitting CIRP applications to proving resolution plans and resolving disputes. Understanding their functions and the scope of their powers is crucial for navigating the IBC landscape. Resolution Professional (RP) is appointed at the start of CIRP and plays a pivotal role. The RP manages the debtor's affairs, prepares the information memorandum, invites resolution plans, and constitutes the Committee of Creditors. The RP ensures the process is transparent, fair, and in line with statutory requirements, acting as a bridge between the debtor, creditors, and potential acquirers. Information Memorandum (IM) is a confidential document prepared by the RP, detailing the corporate debtor's business, assets, liabilities, and operations. Access to the IM is restricted to eligible applicants. It forms the basis for due diligence and plan preparation, but its quality depends on the debtor's records and cooperation. Applicants must be prepared for gaps or outdated information and focus on critical deal breakers during their review. IBC distinguishes between operational and financial creditors. Financial creditors are members of the COSI and have voting rights, while operational creditors do not, though they must receive at least the liquidation value in any approved plan. This distinction affects how claims are treated and how much influence different creditor classes have over the outcome of the CIRP. 66% voting share is required for the COSI to approve a resolution plan, extend the CIRP, or decide on liquidation. This threshold was reduced from 75% to make it easier to reach consensus and prevent minority blocs from stalling the process. The change has helped streamline decision-making and improve the efficiency of the CIRP. For small or unlisted companies with limited assets, the IBC provides a fast-track CIRP with a statutory period of 90 days, extendable by 45 days. While used less frequently, this option aims to resolve insolvency quickly for simpler cases, reducing costs and maximizing value for creditors. However, even fast-track cases can face practical delays. Possibility of liquidation serves as the baseline against which all resolution plans are measured. If no plan is approved, the company is liquidated, and proceeds are distributed according to the Section 53 waterfall. This threat incentivizes creditors and applicants to reach a resolution, as liquidation often results in lower recoveries for all parties. Cases involving listed companies, SEBI regulations such as the SASD, substantial acquisition of shares and takeovers regulations may be triggered. Other approvals, like from the Reserve Bank of India or sectoral regulators, may also be required. These approvals often run in parallel with the CIRP but must be factored into the overall timeline, especially after recent Supreme Court clarification. Valid resolution plan must include details on how the plan will be implemented and supervised. This includes mechanisms for taking over management, ensuring payments are made, and monitoring compliance with the plan's terms. Effective implementation is critical for the success of the acquisition and for maintaining creditor confidence in the IBC process. Section 32 requires that even financial creditors who dissent or do not vote in favor of the resolution plan must receive at least what they would get in a liquidation. This protects minority creditors and ensures that the plan is fair, even if not all creditors agree with the majority decision. IBC's provisions have been subject to extensive judicial interpretation, with the Supreme Court playing a key role in clarifying ambiguities and resolving conflicts. Major cases like SR Steel, ArcelorMittal, and Ghanshyam Misra have shaped the practical application of the law. Practitioners must stay current with case law to navigate the evolving landscape. IBC's approach to insolvency-driven acquisitions continues to spark policy debates, especially around promoter exclusion, treatment of government dues, and the balance between creditor rights and business continuity. These debates influence legislative amendments and judicial decisions, making the field dynamic and sometimes contentious. In response to practical challenges, the IBC has seen sector-specific carve-outs, such as for real estate projects or industries with unique characteristics. These carve-outs aim to balance the need for discipline with the realities of specialized businesses, ensuring that the resolution process remains effective across different sectors. Looking ahead, the IBC is expected to continue evolving, with further reforms aimed at improving efficiency, transparency, and outcomes for all stakeholders. Digitalization, streamlined procedures, and greater clarity on contentious issues are likely to shape the future of insolvency-driven acquisitions in India. Staying informed and adaptable will be key for success in this space. Recap: insolvency-driven acquisitions under the IBC offer a structured, court-supervised path for acquiring distressed assets in India. The process is governed by strict eligibility criteria, competitive plan submissions, and a clean slate effect that protects acquirers from legacy liabilities. However, practical challenges, ongoing reforms, and evolving jurisprudence mean that careful planning and up-to-date knowledge are essential for success. Part IX complete. The treatise will next address minority protection and valuation disputes in M&A, including squeeze-out rights, oppression and mismanagement petitions, and valuation challenges. These topics are crucial for understanding how dissenting shareholders are protected and how value is determined in complex transactions. Stay tuned for the next part of our series for a comprehensive look at these important issues. Thank you for joining us on this in-depth journey through insolvency-driven acquisitions under the IBC. We've covered the legal framework, practical realities, and key judicial decisions shaping this dynamic area of Indian M&A law. Whether you're a student, practitioner, or business leader, understanding the IBC is essential for navigating today's corporate landscape. For more insights and updates, continue with the next part of our series or explore related topics in our Complete Subject Universe series.